For John Kowalski, a third-generation steelworker from Youngstown, Ohio, the silence was deafening. Instead of the familiar roar of the blast furnace, there was only the cold wind whistling through shattered factory windows and the scent of cooling metal. Impersonal words in an official notice about optimization and efficiency improvements erased his family's history. Production was moving overseas. This wasn't just a job loss. It was the destruction of identity for hundreds of families, a symptom of a nationwide illness eroding the American dream. How could this happen in the wealthiest country in the world? The answer isn't as obvious as it seems, and it affects everyone. Why do today's American workers, armed with technology and achieving record productivity, receive a smaller share of the national wealth than their parents did 50 years ago? From 1971 to 2021, the middle class's share of national income plummeted from 61% to 50%. This represents a redistribution of over $10 trillion in wealth. What explains the transformation of higher education and homeownership from reliable paths to prosperity into lifelong debt traps for millions? These two questions are key to understanding the hidden architecture of the new economy. This film will give you 7 keys to crack its code. In just 3 minutes, we will go back to 1955 to understand the foundation upon which the American dream was built and who planted the first bomb beneath it. The year is 1955. How is it possible for a typical family to live on one income, buy a home, and pay for college, while today, even 2 incomes are often not enough? The common explanation points to the golden age of American industry, strong unions, high taxes, and social safety nets. It seems simple, but reality struck not with nostalgia, but with cold mathematics. The key factor wasn't just the economy's power, but how its fruits were distributed. The share of national income going to workers was at a historic high. The top marginal tax rate on the wealthiest incomes reached 91%. Here's a scan of a collective bargaining agreement from that era: lifetime employment, health care, a pension. This fortress of stability seemed eternal, but it was already being undermined by those who saw stability as an impediment to profit. Why was a system that proved effective for the majority declared an enemy? The answer came in the form of a seductive ideology. Deregulation and free markets would liberate the economy, creating more wealth that would trickle down and benefit everyone. It sounded like logical modernization. However, the wealth didn't trickle down. Instead, it surged upward, as if drawn by a powerful pump, siphoning all moisture from the base of a mountain to its peak. The ideology proved to be merely a cover for a massive redistribution. Abstract theory became a personal tragedy for millions. The next step will reveal how these ideas were felt at the level of a single family, a single generation. How did an entire generation's unwavering confidence in the future evaporate in just a few years? In 1975, John Kowalski's father, working at the same plant, paid off a 30-year mortgage in 15 years and saved money for his son's college. He knew he had a future. But beneath that confidence, erosion was already occurring. Legislative attacks on unions, wage freezes under the guise of competition, and the first whispers of efficiency improvements. Anxiety began to seep into dinner table conversations. Here's an archival photo, the father proudly receiving a gold watch for 30 years of service. And here is his son today, holding a cold pink slip. While the internal pillars crumbled, the weapon that would deliver the fatal blow was being forged in the halls where global trade agreements were signed. While American workers fought for their wages, corporations had already found a way to completely bypass this problem. Offshoring, relocating production abroad, seemed a logical consequence of the new ideology, the pursuit of maximum profit at any cost. It appeared to be an inevitable economic process. But it wasn't an act of nature, it was a planned policy. The North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, enacted in 1994, became the legal mechanism that encouraged the export of jobs. Politicians in Congress swore that NAFTA would create millions of jobs in the U.S. The reality, approximately 700,000 jobs destroyed or displaced in the first 20 years. Empty factory floors. Closed signs. Politicians promised prosperity but opened Pandora's box. But Pandora's box proved far more terrifying than anyone could have imagined. How did one country on the other side of the world devastate America's industrial centers in a single decade, achieving what neither wars nor depressions could? The trigger was China's entry into the World Trade Organization, WTO, in 2001. This was presented as a triumph of free trade, promising Americans inexpensive goods. But economists from MIT called it something else, the China shock. It wasn't a wave, it was a tsunami. From 2001 to 2011, it led to the direct loss of 2.4 million American jobs. That's as if every resident of Houston, the fourth largest city in the U.S., suddenly became unemployed. Now let's see what this red wave on the map looked like at the street level. What happens to a town when its heart, the factory, suddenly stops? Life drains from its streets. After being laid off, a worker desperately searches for new employment but finds only low-wage service jobs. This appears to be a personal failure, but it's a collective tragedy. On Main Street in Galesburg, Illinois, after the Maytag plant closed in 2004, the only sound became the creak of traffic lights changing for empty intersections. Storefronts were boarded up. They didn't just take a factory, they took our tax base, our schools, and our future. But while blue-collar workers struggled to survive, most Americans saw only a deceptively attractive benefit. If globalization was so destructive, why did it seem beneficial? The main argument was lower prices for consumer goods. Every American benefited from cheap TVs, clothes, and toys. It seemed like a fair trade, but the numbers shatter this illusion. Yes, a family might save $500 a year on goods, but the head of that family was losing a job with a $50,000 salary. This deal was like selling bricks from your home's foundation to buy cheap wallpaper. The house might look a little newer, but its structure becomes irreversibly weaker. The small Made in China label on a baseball glove became a symbol of a massive shift, but the biggest threat was no longer growing overseas, it was emerging in Silicon Valley. Why, when manufacturing began returning to the U.S., did the jobs not come back? Brilliant, smart factories emerged. It looked like a revival, but inside these plants were nearly deserted. Instead of hundreds of workers, there were rows of robotic arms. Globalization taught companies to do without American workers. Automation allowed them to do so, even on American soil. At the new Adidas factory in Atlanta, 24 technicians oversee robots producing 50,000 pairs of shoes annually. This work would traditionally require over 600 people. Globalization was just the first phase. We saw blue-collar jobs float overseas. In the next part, we'll see white-collar jobs begin to dissolve into code. How could it be that American workers today, more productive than ever, receive a smaller share of wealth than their parents did 50 years ago? Imagine a graph, 2 lines, productivity and wages, growing together for decades. The country gets richer, and workers get richer. This seemed like a natural law. But in the early 1970s, that law was broken. The productivity line continued its ascent, while the real wages of the average worker stagnated for nearly half a century. The gap between them represents trillions of dollars that never reached people's pockets. Where did they go? Let's add a third line to the graph, the incomes of the wealthiest 1%. It almost perfectly mirrors the productivity curve. The money didn't disappear, it was redirected. What invisible force allowed companies to increase profits without hiring new people or raising wages? We're used to thinking of automation as a blue-collar problem, robots in car factories. For office workers, a computer was a tool, not a replacement. But the real revolution was quiet and digital. It's called robotic process automation, RPA. This isn't just software. It's a digital worker, an algorithm that mimics human clicks and data entry, operating 24 hours a day without errors or a salary. A single implementation in a large bank can automate up to 2 million hours of routine work annually. That's the equivalent of 1,000 full-time employees. Now, you're not competing with a colleague in India, but with an infinite amount of code. What does it feel like to realize your years of experience have been devalued by a single line of code? For a financial analyst in Chicago, it was a corporate demonstration of new software. The program completed his week's work in 3 minutes. At first, it seemed like a breakthrough, a helpful tool. But then he heard management's key phrases, not assisting employees, but increasing efficiency and reducing hours. On stage, a smiling startup founder in a hoodie spoke of disruptive technologies that destroy old models. He said, "We're not eliminating jobs, we're eliminating boring work." But for millions, That boring work represented a stable income and a career. Having lost this stability, the middle class was offered a poisonous remedy. If real wages weren't growing, how did American families continue to buy homes and cars? The answer is one word: debt. Financial deregulation opened the floodgates of consumer credit. Credit cards, mortgages, and auto loans became an unofficial policy. If we can't give people wage growth, we'll give them debt growth. From 1980 to 2007, household debt surged by 190%. This house of cards collapsed in 2008. The crisis destroyed not only jobs, but also the savings of millions. The system saved the banks, but not the people. Education, housing, healthcare, the three pillars of the American dream. In the next section, we will see how each of them was transformed into a lifelong debt prison. Why have American college tuition costs risen by over 1,200% since 1980, outpacing inflation, housing prices, and healthcare? The noble idea of government-guaranteed student loans was supposed to make education accessible to all. But when the government guarantees debt repayment, colleges realize they can raise prices indefinitely. Students will take out loans regardless. The availability of credit itself became the cause of price increases. The result: $1.7 trillion in student debt. Over 3 million Americans over the age of 60 are still repaying these loans. This is debt that is virtually impossible to discharge even in bankruptcy, an eternal chain. And upon graduation, students fell into the next trap: a broken housing market. How did home ownership, the ultimate symbol of stability, become a source of constant fear? Housing prices grew far faster than incomes, making the dream impossible without a massive, lifelong mortgage. But it wasn't just demand. Wall Street, using complex financial instruments, inflated a giant bubble in the real estate market. When it burst, ordinary people paid the price. The housing market was like a forest where families grew their wealth. Financial instruments became a genetically modified weed that choked everything, leaving poisoned soil. Today, giant investment funds are buying up thousands of homes on this very soil. Now you're not competing with another family, but with a faceless corporation. But there's another fear that can destroy everything in a single day. Why does the United States spend twice as much on healthcare as any other developed country, yet achieve worse outcomes and leave millions on the brink of bankruptcy? The private insurance system is complex, and it seems a policy should solve the problem. This illusion shatters with a single hospital bill. 60% of personal bankruptcies in the U.S. are linked to medical debt, and most of these individuals were insured. Consider this: a single diagnosis can wipe out your life savings. Ask yourself, have you ever delayed a doctor's visit out of fear of the bill? This is that invisible chain. And when traditional paths to stability were blocked, the system offered a new, flexible solution. How can one work 60 hours a week and remain below the poverty line without sick leave or a pension? The rise of the app economy after the 2008 crisis appeared innovative. Tech companies offered millions of people flexibility and the chance to be their own boss. In reality, it was a response to desperation. People flocked to the gig economy not in search of freedom, but in search of any income to pay for rising education, housing, and medical bills. Advertisements showed smiling people talking about freedom. The reality: after deducting expenses for gas and depreciation, a driver's earnings often fall below $7 an hour. Behind the shining facade lurked a new form of exploitation. They promised you'd become an entrepreneur, but in truth, you were turned into a cog in an algorithm. How is it that key career decisions for millions of Americans are being made by invisible software code? The rise of the machines has already happened, not in the form of robots, but as HR software. The system operates like a series of sieves. The first, the coarsest, screens out resumes without the right keywords. The second, finer one, filters out unproductive minutes in the workday. The final sieve attempts to detect signs of future disloyalty. The creators of these systems speak of impartiality, but they are trained on data full of human biases and merely automate discrimination. Robotic process automation, RPA, eliminates over 3 million hours of routine work annually in the financial services sector alone. The algorithm's next step: to render not just your labor, but your entire professional experience obsolete. For a millennial analyst in Chicago, this realization came under the cold light of a projector. A voice from HR announced the implementation of a platform called Synapse. His decade of experience was compressed into a single, outdated line in a database. His department was downsized, and his functions were transferred to a tool that performed the same work 10 times faster. He was told his position had been optimized, but the true cruelty emerged later. Dozens of job openings at his level now required skills in working with the very artificial intelligence that replaced him. He was expected to become an assistant to his replacement, preparing data for the algorithm. He didn't lose to a person, he lost to the exponential growth of technology. This breaks logic. Why have professions requiring creativity and higher education suddenly found themselves on the front lines of automation? The prevailing myth was that robots only threatened blue-collar workers on assembly lines. This led office workers to think, this won't affect me. But the numbers shatter that illusion. Up to 40% of work tasks for lawyers, marketers, and programmers could be automated in the next decade. This is equivalent to 2 full workdays out of a 5-day week simply disappearing. Articles from GPT-4, images from Midjourney, they are already here, cutting costs. Tech giants have found a way to sell this new instability as the highest form of freedom. How did the idea of being your own boss turn into a job with fewer rights than a McDonald's worker had in the 1980s? The marketing for the gig economy was a masterpiece. Work when you want. Be your own boss. But this freedom meant transferring all risks to the worker: gas, depreciation, insurance, taxes, no sick leave. The business model operates like a dam. The corporation builds an app to capture the entire flow of money, but it redirects all costs downstream to individual workers, leaving them with a mere trickle of profit. The key trick: independent contractor status. It deprives you of minimum wage protection and the right to unionize. In the next section, we will audit a driver's real earnings to see who truly profits in this system. Let's look into the finances of a driver who works 60 hours a week for one of the world's most technologically advanced companies. At first glance, it seems like a steady income. The app sends orders and money flows into the account. In a month, he earns $3,500. Not bad, it seems. But now let's deduct the hidden costs: $600 for gas, $300 for special insurance, $400 for car depreciation, and $500 for self-employment taxes. His real income: $1,700 for 240 hours. That's $7.08 per hour. Below the federal minimum wage. Less than half the living wage in most cities. No sick leave, no pension. The real boss in this system isn't the customer or the company. It's the code that knows your psychological weaknesses. Who decides how much you earn and if you're allowed to work tomorrow? The algorithm. Its visible function: to efficiently connect supply and demand. But its real job: management. It uses gamification, offering bonuses for 10 rides to make you work longer. It's like a dopamine hit. It punishes you for refusing unprofitable orders by lowering your priority. A pain signal. Its power is absolute. Here's a screenshot, a deactivation message: termination by code, based on complaints, without investigation or the right to appeal. It's like severing a nerve ending. The worker here isn't a partner, they are a resource. And this entire system of control rests on a single legal trick. Why is the fight to classify drivers as employees the key labor dispute of the 21st century? An employee has rights to a minimum wage, insurance, and unemployment benefits. An independent contractor, as companies insist, has none of these. This allows them to shift all social costs onto the worker and the state. But this model is already spreading to food delivery, elder care, and programming. It's creating a new standard of labor, stripped of guarantees. In California, Uber, Lyft, and DoorDash spent over $200 million to promote a law permanently cementing contractor status. This was more than spent on any other initiative in the state's history. This new reality has given rise to a new social class. What do a laid-off steelworker from Ohio, a downsized analyst from Chicago, and a driver from Los Angeles have in common? They all belong to a new global class, the precariat, a portmanteau of precarious and proletariat. These are people deprived of stable employment, social guarantees, and a predictable future. 3 different individuals, 3 different paths, but the same destination. Globalization, automation, and the gig economy have led them to the same state of financial insecurity. And while this class of unstable workers grew, an unprecedented concentration of wealth occurred at the other end of society. These are not two separate processes. They are two sides of the same coin. Next, we will see the final picture, a nation split into two Americas. How could it be that 50 years of technological breakthroughs have made most Americans poorer than their less productive parents? The answer, it was the greatest peacetime redistribution of wealth in history. Since 1971, over $50 trillion have been siphoned from the pockets of 90% of the population into the hands of the wealthiest 1%. Here are two graphs. One shows the stagnant income of the middle class, while the other, resembling a hockey stick, shows the explosive growth of elite incomes. Today, just 3 of the wealthiest Americans own more wealth than the combined net worth of the poorest 160 million citizens. It's as if the population of the entire western half of the country, from Texas to California, owned nothing compared to 3 individuals in a single room. This system operates not as a dialogue, but as gardening. Superwealth isn't just one voice, it's the soil, the fertilizer, and the sunlight. Politicians growing in this soil inevitably bear fruit that benefits only the gardener, while the rest of society's wild forest withers without resources. Corporations spend billions on lobbying to shape laws in their favor. For every member of the U.S. Congress, there are dozens of registered lobbyists. This isn't a glitch in democracy, it's its capture. Wealth buys political influence, which creates laws that generate even more wealth. It's a closed loop. What does it mean to live in these two Americas? It means that while a driver in Los Angeles skips dinner to complete 3 more orders and pay an $87 overdue electricity bill, an innovator from Silicon Valley at a Davos conference discusses the existential risks of artificial intelligence, sipping $50 a cup coffee. Their children have different educations, different health care, different justice. The American dream hasn't evaporated. It has been systematically dismantled to build a paradise for a few. The system isn't broken. It's working exactly as designed. The 7 keys we've examined are not just a list of problems. They represent 7 successive steps in a single destructive process. The shockwave of globalization and the rise of machines created pressure on wages, leading to the Great Stagnation. This stagnation made the middle class vulnerable to debt traps. Technology spawned the illusion of the gig economy, which normalized instability and created new class divisions. All of this was built upon the ruins of the Golden Age. These elements create a vicious cycle from which it is nearly impossible to escape alone. In the final section, starting in 15 seconds, we will put all the pieces of this puzzle together and ask the ultimate question: what next? To understand how the foundation collapsed, we must connect the 2 forces that struck the American worker. They didn't compete, they complemented each other. The shockwave of globalization was the anvil. It created a hard surface of global competition against which wages in the Rust Belt were shattered. The Made in China label became a tombstone for millions of jobs. The rise of machines was the hammer. It delivered blow after blow, eliminating work not only on assembly lines, but also in seemingly invulnerable office towers. Together, they squeezed the worker in a vice. Your job could either go overseas or be consumed by an algorithm. This nullified bargaining power, and this pressure on wages gave birth to the dead economy. When wages stopped growing with the economy, how did families continue to buy homes and pay for college? The graph showing the divergence of productivity and compensation isn't just theory, it's documentary evidence. The value you created stopped returning to you. Into this void poured debt, student loans, mortgages, medical bills. Their costs grew many times faster than inflation. Debt became a surrogate for income growth. This vicious cycle works like a leak in an engine's cooling system. Wage stagnation is a slow leak of your money. To prevent the family budget from overheating, credits are constantly added. But this only masks the problem until one day the engine finally seizes up. A system built on stagnation and debt needed a new kind of worker, flexible, cheap, and powerless. The illusion of the gig economy became the perfect solution. It packaged instability in a bright wrapper of freedom, but in reality, it was the final step in transferring all risks onto you. Thus, the precariat was born. This isn't the cause of the crisis, but its logical conclusion. When stable jobs became too expensive for corporations, they simply abolished them. Now the whole picture is clear. Globalization and automation created pressure. This pressure led to stagnation and debt. This situation created a demand for unstable work, which the gig economy offered, ultimately fracturing society. Here's the final paradox. The system was reconfigured so that the fruits of progress flowed in only one direction, upward. We have dissected the anatomy of this system. Now it's time for a verdict. What caused this divide? There are only two answers, and your choice matters. The first, these are uncontrollable forces. Technological progress cannot be stopped. Global competition is an objective reality. In this version, no one is to blame. It's simply the course of history. The second, this is conscious policy, the result of specific decisions made by elites, trade agreements, tax reforms, laws written by lobbyists in their own favor. In this version, the crisis has architects. Now, the main question for you, what is the primary cause, uncontrollable forces or conscious policy? Write one word in the comments, forces or policy. Let's see the verdict.